Welcome back. It's Weekend Watches. Happy Sunday. I hope everyone is having a relaxing morning. Ready to join me, carefree and chock full of caffeine. Let's get started. Remember, everything on the table, whether we've listed it or not on our website, is for sale. So give a ring to Brian Govberg at thewatchbox.com, or PM Brian Govberg on Instagram. Let's jump straight in to two dive watches that represent, well, fierce rivals. It's the Omega Seamaster Planet Ocean versus the Rolex Oyster Perpetual Sea Dweller 43. Now, the Omega, in its current form, launched at Baselworld 2016. 43.5 millimeters in stainless steel. The watch has a lovely and lush ceramic blue dial with ceramic bezel insert. And you can see the Rolex launched in 2017. This is the 50th anniversary Sea Dweller. 43 millimeters in diameter. It was the first ever Sea Dweller with a Cyclops eye. Now, the Omega has a 60-hour power reserve. The Rolex has 70. But let's see how they look on the wrist, because that often tells the tale, as this is an emotional hobby and we are largely drawn to the watches that look best on our wrists rather than the correct clinical choice. And this is an emotional watch. The Rolex Sea Dweller in 43 millimeters is wearable on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist, whereas the 44 millimeter Deep Sea, even the 2018 evolution of it, is not quite wearable on my wrist. Now, the timepiece, of course, from, I should mention, 2017 was the new sizing for the Deep Sea. The watch is easy to wear and wonderfully comfortable, and you can also see it's not quite as thick as you might have imagined. So this watch will fit underneath a cuff, and of course the timepiece featuring a very complex clasp, featuring a double lock. You have both the lift lock system and you have a clamshell, and then of course inside you have two different ways to extend. You have the glide lock system. Let me invert everything so you can see it. Glide lock inside the clasp, 20 millimeters in 10 2mm adjustment intervals, and that's for sizing, whereas the flip lock system, which folds out, is all or nothing, and that gives you about 50 millimeters of adjustment all in. Of course, caliber 3235 inside the watch. That gives you a wonderfully accommodating 70-hour power reserve and 4,000 feet water resistant with a helium escape valve built into the flank of the watch. Nice clean orientation, as there is no external appurtenance, unlike what you find on the Omega. I'll also mention that I love the evocative return of the red Sea Dweller script, but I also appreciate that this is a rare matte black dial for Rolex, giving the watch a little bit of a vintage appearance, a reference to the original 1967 Sea Dweller. Wonderful bezel action. Let me hold it up to the mic so you can actually hear it. That is part of the experience. A good feel. Let's jump straight to the Omega, the Planet Ocean. The Omega not quite as refined, I'd say even a little bit coarse, although just as pronounced. They're both precise bezels, but I prefer the feel of the Rolex. Now, the Omega is handsome on the wrist. As you can see, the blue is quite emotional in its own right, handsome and glossy. It's almost as though the dial extends unbroken into the bezel insert itself. Now, the watch is thick, and it is thicker than the Rolex, as you can see, but it's still wearable on a smaller wrist. The bracelet is surprisingly similar to the Rolex Oyster. As you can see, it's a 3-link design. Now, there are two incremental adjustment systems here. One is an all-or-nothing fold-out, and you can see that all-or-nothing fold-out works a lot like Rolex flip-lock. Internally, you have a push-button slider, but there's not quite as much adjustment here. 9.6 millimeters of incremental adjustment, but it is very user-friendly with the push-button system as opposed to the somewhat bulky slider of the Rolex. So which of these two do you prefer? Let me know in the comments below. Now let's jump to something that could not be more different than what you just saw. Launched in 2017 and based on a 2014 rollout. This is the Bulgari Finissimo. This is the Revolution limited edition. 50 pieces, 40 millimeters, titanium, beautifully media blasted, curved, and faceted with a dial that is also blasted titanium, and you can see it has been skeletonized to show an engine-turned movement baseplate on the underside. The watch was designed in conjunction with Waco, a fashionista, as well as the founder of the Rake and Revolution magazine. You can see the Revo logo on the caseback. So the dial is exclusive, and so is the power reserve scale on the reverse side. Manual wind, 55 to 60 hour power reserve. This is BVL 128, an extraordinarily thin movement, under 2.5 millimeters thick, and you can see the entire watch only 5.3 millimeters thick, with a combination of a double row knurled polished crown with a ceramic cabochon outboard. Throw it on the wrist and it practically disappears. There's a wonderful matte finish to the alligator leather strap, which is bonded rather than stitched to give it a seamless and low-slung appearance to match the watch. This is truly a second skin watch that vanishes, and you can see at certain angles with respect to the camera, it almost quite literally vanishes against the skin. Again, 5.3 millimeters thick, but it wears flat and flush. A beautiful Gerald Genta influenced design that is nevertheless evocative of modern Bulgari innovation. The Octo Finissimo family is the reason Bulgari is going somewhere as a watch manufacturer. They are well on their way to being on par with the likes of Geo, Zenith, possibly even Jaeger-LeCoultre a few years down the line. Now let's talk about a timepiece that is anything but a conventional sports watch. Somewhere between a dress watch and a sports watch is the Panerai Radiomir Oro Bianco 3 days. This is the 376, launched in 501 pieces, as you see it right here, in white gold with plexiglass crystal and a California-style Roman and Arabic dial. Back in 2011, this was a very hot piece, and there was actually a triplet set that you could purchase that included the 373, the 376, and the 379. The watch is handsome, and inboard you can see there's a lovely gilt-style golden railroad track outboard for tracing the minutes, rose gold hands at center. There is a wonderful plexiglass distortion, and Panerai made sure to use a colossal vaulted and domed plexiglass for maximum distortion effect to remind you of the original Panerai Radiomir, as it was known, 3646 in service, a watch for which Radiomir was the loom and 3646 was the reference number. Screw-down crown, 100 meters water-resistant, caliber P3000, double barrel, manual wind, 21.6 beat rate, and a 3-day power reserve. You can see it has a handsome satin-finished set of bridges designed to be read as one integrated whole in the form of the Rolex 618 Côte d'Ivoire movements that would have been fitted as pocket watch calibers in the Rolex manufactured 3646 back in the day. Today, caliber 3000 is Panerai in-house, and as you could see, it features a wonderful time zone functionality that allows you to, I'm going to show you how this works, but allows you to independently step the hour hand as you travel with the watch, so that, for example, if you want to change the time without affecting the minutes as you travel, you can do exactly that. The watch in white gold is quite substantial, and if you're a fan of Panerai, then you know that this lug system allows you to remove the screws underneath the wire-style lugs, pull them out of the case, and swap the strap. But the strap fitted is a handsome contrasting stitch alligator leather with a lovely white gold trapezoidal pin buckle for quick adjustment. Now, though it is a 47 millimeter and quite thick, it is nevertheless a fairly easy watch to wear. Big is the style, but if you're into the oversized aesthetic, the watch does fit a charm, as the wire lugs are barely there, and as you can see, the case itself doesn't project beyond my wrist. The lugs are really only there to sling the strap. As a result, the watch wears more like a 42 or a 43 than a 47. I really like that model. Now, let's talk a little bit about a timepiece that is a no-holds-barred dress watch. This watch, launched in 2009, was a revelation and a revolution. Pardon to Waco, but this is the revolution on the table tonight. The Zeitvik. I had to start with that. Of course, a watch that transformed the popular conception of a Lange und Söhne, this 42mm white gold watch, was the bomb back then, and it remains so today. Jumping hours, jumping tens of minutes, and jumping minutes, power reserve scale, and of course center seconds. What you see, the silver on the dial, what appears to be a silver cutaway, is actually part of the movement. And you can see there's actually a clear sapphire that serves as the pivot disc, or the pivot point for the two discs that comprise the minutes display. Turn it all over, manual wind, exquisite, beautifully rendered in German silver, nickel, copper, zinc. It's not actually silver, but the copper element in the alloy creates that golden hue. Big balance beaten away at 18,000 vibrations per hour. A huge mainspring that is formidable to wind and a tactile pleasure to wind. One side is actually fixed to the plate of the movement. Now you can see there's a stopworks mechanism, black polished atop the barrel, to stop the movement when it no longer has enough power to jump the minutes. There is a system that includes a little pinwheel or air brake to slow down the power transmission as it jumps the minutes, and then it travels through a bridge to a double third wheel with a hairspring in between. That is a remontoir d'égalité constant force device. FP Journe uses a linear spring, Lange uses a hairspring, and then that meets out power to the balance. I should mention that every minute power is transferred from the barrel to the remontoir and thus to the balance. freehand engraved, the half bridge for both the balance and the escape wheel, and you'll note both the swan's neck and the cover to the escape wheel cock, black polished. The freehand engraving means no two are exactly alike, and it is an absolute pleasure to wind this watch. It sounds good, it feels good. There's even a wonderful swan's neck style click spring, evocative of the pocket watch era. Throw it on the wrist. 42 is large, but not overpowering. In a lot of ways, this reminds me of the white gold Duomet, a JLC chronograph that I once owned. It feels the same in size, in stature, and yes, in status, as both are revered by the true watch-collecting cognoscenti. We talked about F. P. Journe's Remontoire d'Égalité, and why don't we discuss it in detail? Because I have the watch that represents F. P. Journe's finest effort with mechanical watchmaking. He has often said that his goal is to create a mechanical watch that is as accurate or more accurate relative to quartz. And in 2012, he made his best play yet. This is the Chronomet Optimum. Manual wind, 40 millimeters in platinum. You can see the timepiece features a deadbeat system that is linked to the Remontoire d'Égalité. Now you have that deadbeat seconds on the caseback, and then on the dial side, you can see the stepping, but you also have sweep seconds. A power reserve for the 70-hour power reserve, but for 45 to 48 hours, the watch maintains constant amplitude from maximum wind to about 2/3 discharged. It's important to note that the watch is able to maintain perfectly accurate amplitude, so if you wind it every day, you will never suffer a loss of amplitude and thus pronounced timing deviation with this watch. But that's not all F. P. Journe attempted to maximize precision. 2 mainspring barrels to even out the torque release. You have the Remontoire d'Égalité constant force device. You have 6 position adjustment, 1 more than a standard chronometer. And then you have a double direct impulse, unlubricated, essentially evolution of the Breguet natural escapement, 2 titanium unlubricated escape wheels, impulsing the balance only in its direction of travel, minimal parasitic drag, and of course improving the power reserve as well, but there is also an overcoil hairspring, the last line of defense against variation, this one for positional or gravitational deviation. So you have the twin mainspring barrels, the Remontoire d'Égalité, you have 6 position adjustment, you have the direct impulse escapement, and you have the overcoil hairspring. All of this in a movement that features 18-karat rose gold bridges and plates. And note there is a hidden train, as you can't easily see the transmission of power from the barrels to the balance, and there's a broad open channel between, handsomely finished, open, sculpted, and immaculately executed, with multiple different materials, textures, tones, and as you can see, multiple different planes of focus so you can glance diagonally into this movement. Throw it on the wrist, easy to wear. As thin as it is, it's hard to believe that the watch is as complicated as it is. It's a bit of a cerebral watch, and in some ways you could almost describe it as an upgraded F. P. Journe tourbillon without the tourbillon. It is that and more, but the Chronomet Optimum is the thinking man's F. P. Journe and, it must be stated, the purest expression of his horological art. That said, not everyone is so clinical, and for those, there will always be Longa, a model launched in its initial iteration back in 2001. This is the Saxonia family Longomatic Perpetual, 38.5 millimeters in rose gold. The dial is sterling silver and then galvanized, this pale silver you see, but a perpetual calendar. And the watch is wonderful to operate because it features an entertaining 0 reset seconds system. Down at 6 o'clock, you can see when I pull the crown, the seconds hand automatically resets. That is emblematic of the Panerai Calibre. I should also mention the watch is loomed and thus very practical. Turn it all over and you can see that Panerai Calibre. Beautifully executed, also in German silver, as with the Zeitvik. You have both gold and platinum on the winding rotor, and it is handsomely rendered with engine-turned perlage large under the balance, small under the rotor. You can see black polish, satin finish. You could see glasuta stripes across the bridge, more freehand engraving on the half bridge for the balance. Throw it on the wrist, and the watch is wonderfully wearable at under 48 millimeters from lug to lug. You can see how it really hunkers down on the wrist. Again, 16 centimeters circumference. My wrist wears this one easily. This is a natural size for me, and at 38.5, I'm willing to bet for a lot of guys, this is the sweet spot between truly petite traditional men's dress watches of 32 to 35 millimeters and the 40 plus that passes for a dress watch today. Again, the sweet spot in a beautiful medley of tones, rose and silver and blue. This watch is a keeper and would be a mainstay in any collection. Do I want this or a Patek Perpetual? Do you have to ask? That said, if you go with a Patek Philippe Perpetual, we can up the ante. Why go for just a Perpetual calendar? We answer a longa unzona with a Perpetual calendar chronograph. And this is the 5270G-018. So the 2015 redesign of the dial. The chin has been toned down a little bit, but we still have the tachymeter scale. We have lovely blackened white gold indices and white gold hands. And you can see the watch with its, if you want to quickly rewind this, the watch with its jumping minutes, a wonderful refinement of the traditional Patek Philippe Perpetual calendar chronograph dating back to the original 1518 back in 1941. This is the legacy behind this 41mm white gold manual wind Perpetual calendar chronograph. On the caseback, you can see caliber CH29535 PSQ. Now, the watch is wonderfully deep, as with the Longa and the FP Journe, there's a depth to this movement and a complexity and a nuance to the textures, tones, colors, and materials that a two-dimensional soldier shot online simply can't capture. Now, if you look closely, you can see that there is a lateral clutch that is exquisitely fully jeweled. No bushings here. The balance beaten away at 4 Hertz or 8 beats per second. Free sprung. It is Gyromax. It features a handmade Breguet overcoil hairspring, no silicone in this watch, and you'll appreciate that everything is immaculately rendered. The finish here is exquisite. Manual wind, 65-hour power reserve, and of course, this being a modern Patek, it does feature hacking or stop seconds. Black polished cap to the column wheel. When you disengage, you can reset, throw it on the wrist, and it is a pleasure. Although large, by traditional Patek standards, 41 is by no means huge. The watch is 13mm thick, so it's by no means thick. Easy to wear, but larger and more insistent than something like a 3970 or even a 5970. It's a watch with presence, but presence that it asserts with good manners. Never obstreperous, never overly boisterous, and the silver dial is considered the most universal of the options offered, as it wears well with almost everything. Let's go back to sports watches. Let's go back to FP Journe. Now, this is a model that's been released in the last year, an upgrade of the long-running Line Sport. The Line Sport arrived in 2012. They were aluminum. After 2014, they were titanium. And after 2018, this is the Sonograph Sport. Whereas the standard Sonograph is 40, the original Sonograph Line Sport was 42. This is titanium and 44 with a yellow lacquered dial. And my favorite detail of this dial isn't the sapphires that allow you to see the operation of the caliber underneath. It's actually the black outlines for the solid three-dimensional blocks of luminova that serve as the numerals. The numerals have depth, they have height, and they have volume, and around their outer face you could see that they've been outlined in black to pop against this gloss yellow lacquer. Now, there is a matte finished bezel for the registers at center, and you can see we've done away with the tachymeter scales from the standard Sonograph so that we can open these registers, read them more easily, and glimpse the movement through their centers. 1 second in 1/100th of a second increments, the foudroyant giving the watch its name, Sonograph. There is a 20-second register over at 2 o'clock, and then at the base of the dial, a 10-minute register. That is the largest increment it registers. A new ceramic bezel insert, and of course the patented rocker system. Though the watch looks like a mono pusher, it works like a twin pusher because you can stop it and then restart it. Now, if you stop it altogether and reset, it's a wonderful little piece of theater in its own right, as the reset action has a fun animation to it. Only 10.9mm thick. This watch is all titanium but blackened with rubber bumpers to protect it from abrasion. What's cool about the Line Sport is that the movement is made of aluminum. One of precious few movements made of aluminum. You can see the barrel is at the center. Manual wind, 80-hour power reserve, 24 with the chronograph running, but since the largest register is a 10-minute register, you don't have to worry about running the watch for 24 hours unless you want the associated fireworks. The barrel runs the chronograph principally off the arbor, which is basically the axle of the barrel, and it runs the time off the edge of the barrel, thus achieving zero loss of amplitude when you activate the chronograph. Throw it on the wrist and you can see it's a wonderfully compact watch. Though an imposing 44 on paper, it is a wonderful ergonomic equation that adds up to comfort on the wrist. As you can see, only 10.9mm thick, wonderfully slender. The watch is 54mm end link to end link, but somehow it doesn't feel that way because of the shape. Flush, fit, comfortable, and friendly to a small wrist. This is the 44 that wears like a 40. Okay, let's stick with Geneva-based high horology for a moment. Let's talk about Patek Philippe and a model we don't see too often. We rarely discuss the 5167R, the Aquanaut in rose gold. 40 millimeters and only 8.3 millimeters thick. This watch has an intriguing sort of brown bronze sunburst geosphere dial, and it's that particular gradient that renders this watch more attractive to my eye than the standard 5167A. As you can see, there are rich tones and complexity about that dial. You see some gold, you see some brown, you see some bronze, you see some black, maybe even undertones of violet, with the white on bronze printing being exceptionally high contrast. It's an easy watch to read, and it absolutely aces the Nautilus in the lume shot. That's where this watch really shines. Now the timepiece, of course, with a matching rose gold deployant clasp. No clamshell here, trigger release, and you can see through the caseback Patek Philippe manufacture 324. Water resistant, courtesy of the Aquanaut, case down to 120 meters. Automatic, seriously water resistant, and seriously lumed. This is a full service sports watch, and of course with the Patek Philippe seal, Spiromax silicone hairspring, and Gyromax balance adjusted in 6 positions. This is a watch that can easily keep chronometer grade time, and Patek swears with the Patek Philippe seal today no worse than -3 plus 2 seconds per 24 hours. Remember, COSC chronometer is -4 plus 6 per 24 hours. This goes above and beyond while looking damn fine doing so. Sticking with Geneva sports watches, let's talk about one that frankly gets too much press, but which is also discontinued and thus increasing in its collectability. I have actually seen a small drop in the pre-owned value of the Jubilee bracelet 2019 BLNR. This year, I've also seen a commensurate rise in the value of the 2013 to 2018 BLNR Oyster, and that's exactly what we have here. A little bit more butch and sporting, perhaps, more substantial. One might even say a little bit more massive, a little bit more monolithic on the wrist. This is a watch that reads more clearly like a 42 or a 43, whereas the Jubilee seems to size the watch down. Now, when that combination of blue and black ceramic bezel insert launched in 2013, it was a first ever for Rolex. So while there may always be another Rolex Batman or Batgirl or whatever, Batmite, we need a Bat Dog and a Batmite. We haven't filled in all of the blanks from the comics. Hell, we need a Nightwing. So what we have here, though, is a watch that will always be the first black and blue GMT. There can never be another first. And take note, there is also a blue GMT hand on the dial. That's often lost in discussion of the watch, but it's an exquisite close range detail when you experience the watch in the flesh. As you can see, it's a relatively thin watch, only about 12.5 millimeters thick, still 100 meters water resistant. Chronometer, COSC+. Rolex has its own certification called Superlative Chronometer today. That's -2 plus 2 or better per 24 hours. The clasp is substantial, though not quite as richly endowed as what you would see on the Sea Dweller. Internally, you've got the Rolex Easy Link system, and then you've got 3 divots drilled in the clasp so you can change the anchoring point of the bracelet. You'll also note there is still the double locking system with the lift lock vertical trigger. You can see it snap into place, and then the clamshell system. 2 locks, a wonderfully resistant watch, anti-magnetic, shock resistant, water resistant. Hell, you could even use it as a pilot's watch. Imagine that, and you can temporarily totalize 3 time zones on the dial by setting the hand to GMT, the 24-hour hand, and then offsetting per the local GMT offset of your port or airport of destination using the bezel. Sticking with high-end chronographs with collectible potential, we're rolling back the clock to 2003 and the very first of the silver Snoopies. I'm going to get that crown, pull it out, and then pack it down so you can enjoy the view of the Charles Schulz-driven lacquered Snoopy on the dial. This was, of course, the symbol of excellence, an internal award given by NASA to its foremost suppliers, and Omega, having participated in innumerable space flights, but most notably the successful recovery of Apollo 13, was the recipient of a silver Snoopy. Otherwise, this watch is a conventional moonwatch built in a limited edition of 5,441 pieces. You can see the other signature is the image of Snoopy, the exact same Snoopy on the caseback, and that particular Snoopy in the spacesuit was drawn expressly for the NASA prize by Peanuts creator Charles Schulz. Now, the timepiece, a limited edition of 5,441, may not seem particularly scarce until you realize that these watches are worth more now than they have ever been worth in the past. They have that classical Hesalite thermoplastic bubble on top, 42mm case, Moonwatch caliber 1861, and the watch wears like a conventional Moonwatch. If the 2015 silver Snoopy on the strap isn't your style. Go full bracelet with the silver Snoopy 1, a watch that's just as handsome and just as quirky and just as lovable as it ever was. Whether you're a fan of the Peanuts or not, this is the Omega to own if you're going to own just one Omega, a Moonwatch, and if you're going to own just one Moonwatch, make it a silver Snoopy. 5,441 pieces. Well, 5441 happens to be the reference number of a much-loved and seriously special modern-day IWC Portuguese. This was the rebirth of the Portuguese. Keep in mind that from 1939 and the original reference 325 to 1993 and this anniversary model, perhaps 600 to 700 Portuguesers of all descriptions were built. Over all of those decades, 600 wristwatches. Now this watch, built in 500 pieces in rose gold, was part of the IWC Jubilee back in 1993. This was a big deal at the time. There was a platinum version in 250 pieces, a steel version in 1,000 pieces, 500 in rose gold, and note, individual numbering, something with which IWC would later do away on most limited editions. You have the vintage International Watch Co. Schaffhausen script, Arabic numerals vertically arrayed, small seconds, no date, leaf hands. This 42mm rose gold watch was the rebirth of the Portugueser and the reintroduction of this watch as a regular offering in the collection. Now you can see the timepiece features another plexiglass. We have tons of these thermoplastics on the show today to give it proper historical authenticity. The watch is also remarkably thin at only 9.8mm thick, and just as the original reference 325 was powered by a pocket watch caliber, here we have a true IWC pocket watch caliber, actually a descendant of that original and a derivative of the great caliber 98. This is the 9828. You could see it is a big, slow beat 18K balance with an overcoil hairspring adjusted in 5 positions like a chronometer. This 19 jewel movement features stop seconds thanks to the world's largest and most visible hacking lever. You can actually see it moving into and away from contact with the balance. Wind it up, 54-hour power reserve, exceptional. And I should also mention that there is finish on this movement that is far above and beyond what you get on any standard IWC today. For one, you can see real abrasive wheel, not stamped Côte de Genève, and you could see that because of the gradient from light to dark across the waves. You'll note that the jewels are set in chaton, that there are individual finger bridges for the fourth wheel and the escape wheel, black polished swan's neck exquisitely extended. You'll also appreciate the fact that if you can get close to this watch and see it with a loupe, and I recommend you do, it features an exquisite mirrored hand-rounded optically smooth chamfer, not the mechanical angulage you get on a modern-day Portugueser, the real thing. This is a hand-finished limited edition, all-time great. If the Moonwatch is the one Omega to buy, if you're going to buy one Omega, the 5441, in this case 544103, is the one to own. This is a real Portuguese or Portugueser. Throw it on the wrist, and the watch is surprisingly compact, under 10mm thick. It's also just about 50mm from lug to lug. So while large, that has always been the style with the Portuguese. Remember, the original goal was the accuracy of a pocket watch, but in a wristwatch format, combining the pocket watch movement with the wristwatch case of extraordinary size. If you love IWC or you just want to collect the monuments, the one great reference from each house, this is going to be your Schaffhausen timepiece. Moving along, we've got a little bit of everything on the table. You want to go big? Let's go huge. Let's go huge, but with good taste, as every detail of this 2009 Blancpain launch is impeccable. This is the reference 0015. If you're familiar with the standard 5015, this is the 50015, the 500 fathoms, titanium, and as you can see, it features a sandwich-style dial with stencils over sunken loom, a remarkable sector style with both matte and sunburst finished elements. This thing glows like a torch at night. 48mm in diameter with a sapphire-capped bezel, exactly as you would find on the 5015. This 500 fathoms also includes a helium escape valve, which you will not find on the 5015. 53mm lug to lug, so if you can wear a 44mm Panerai, you can wear this. Inside, you get the caliber 1315. Now, this is the same as the 5015, but you can see that it is a display caseback with a lovely engraved propeller style white gold winding mass, and look at this, they even included a little bit of cavitation bubbles around the edge of the propeller. Now the timepiece has a 5-day power reserve, 3 mainspring barrels, free sprung, 28.8 beat rate, 35 joules, stop seconds, quick set date, adjusted in 5 positions like a chronometer, and these, well adjusted by the factory, will run to 1 second a day. Almost indestructible and very precise, beautifully hand finished. This is the best of all possible worlds. And I'm going to prove to you that this watch is also wearable on a human-sized wrist. In fact, I would even say my wrist is a little bit petite for a guy. Remember, I'm a cyclist. That explains these tans. No lie. So as skinny as I am, pencil-necked and pencil wrist, I have no problem wearing this 48mm tank. This thing may be one hell of a juggernaut, but it is a juggernaut in function, not in feel. Feather light thanks to the grade 5 titanium, and wonderfully tasteful thanks to the satin finish. The timepiece sits securely, comfortably, and nicely shaped to trace the contour of my wrist. I have no issues here, and actually, I could say if your wrist is my size, 16 centimeters, you're gonna have a lot of fun with this watch. And by the way, the bezel, which is sapphire capped, is fully lumed. So take note, everything that's on the bezel is fully visible at night. It is a circular supernova. Let's stick with the high-end sports watch theme, and let's go back to Rolex. 2 different tastes of yellow gold. The most traditional gold, Rolex never gave up on Argent. And I should also mention, neither did Lange nor Patek Philippe. So those 3 brands carrying the torch and delivering in extraordinary fashion. This sub is a 116 618 that I happen to adore because it's remarkably attractive in Cornish colors, or Steelers colors, black and gold, and it works incredibly well. 40mm super case, of course, 300 meters water resistant with the same positive bezel action you get on the Sea Dweller, albeit with a glossier dial featuring yellow gold applique. The watch has the same bracelet with the same clasp technology minus the flip lock. You still get the glide lock system inside the clasp, so the ability to adjust 20mm. Throw this watch on the wrist, and I have to say, it's yellow gold in good taste. The sizing of Rolex watches tends towards more traditional rather than oversized, and this watch being thin at 12.7mm thick, flush and comfortable, it does look the part of about a 42 or a 43 on the wrist, but being slender, sculpted, and classically Rolex, it's also a timepiece with impeccable breeding, pedigree, and like I said, wonderful manners. This one has an indoor voice, and I can't say that of most yellow gold full bracelet sports watches. Now let's jump to the 116. 518. So that was the 618, this is the 518. Radially arrayed Arabic numerals on a gloss lacquered blue dial with gold accents about the chapter rings and red highlights. This Cosmo Daytona on full strap is pretty much my platonic ideal of yellow gold Rolex. I can't think of too many ways to do it better, and the watch wears easily. 46.5mm lug to lug means a Daytona on a strap is very comfortable on a small wrist. This is also an unusual variant with that particular dial layout and color scheme. It's distinctive, giving you the best of both worlds. It is a Rolex watch with all the quality and heritage that entails, but it's also an unusual watch of which you're unlikely to ever see a second example. Wonderfully comfortable, handsome, and as I said, a bit of an individualist or counterculture Rolex because it doesn't run with the pack, and you will not see another one around your office. Crazy watches from Independence. Let's talk 2 of my favorites. Now, I had a request to bring back the Maitre du Temps Chapter 3, so I've brought it back in rose gold form with blue dial. We'll talk about this one first. This watch is an exquisite dual time launched in 2012, a collaborative venture between Kari Voutilainen and Andreas Streller. Most of the style of dial and case is Voutilainen, as is the finish and general architecture of the movement SHC03, but when you turn the watch over, you realize that Andreas Streller was behind the exquisitely hidden complication. Twin barrels, a GMT system. You can see that there are barrels at top and bottom of the dial, 2 12-hour barrels at the bottom to represent 24 hours. Now you're looking at 12 noon because you have 12 and you have that hand-painted lacquered sunny sun. Keep turning, and you can see the barrel jumps down at 6 o'clock, and you can actually jump it in either direction. It's power intensive, but the mainspring in this watch is massive. And you could see day lapses into night with the arrival of a similarly cheerful moon. Once you're done, hide everything. Not only does it cover the complications, but the shutters themselves draw flush with the dial. You have small seconds, you have a moon phase, and you have a radial date. Throw it on the wrist, and this watch, which is exquisitely hand-finished inside and out, is a 42 that's 49 lug to lug and about 14 millimeters thick, making it comfortable but visually impressive. Jump into our other independent on the table. We're talking about two brands that between them probably make no more than 1,000 watches a year, the majority of which are going to be Maître du Temps, because right now, Devotees of L'Auberson makes 150 watches a year. This is the DB28 Blue Titanium. You have grade 5 polished titanium for the case, which is 42.7 millimeters and about 11.2 millimeters thick. And then you have blued titanium for the spring-loaded floating lugs. So they actually change their geometry. And yes, if they scratch, Devotees can refire them and re-blue them. Now over the dial, I'm going to remove my fingerprints here, you can see the movement. Twin mainspring barrels, there's a power reserve ducking out from under the bezel flange, a moon phase that is spherical, both blued steel and white palladium, triple parachute, 3 shock protection springs, 1, 2, and 3, with a solid, that's patented, with a solid disc, that is the balance wheel, that is patented, the hairspring is patented, the escape wheel in silicon is patented. All of these features helping to make the watch remarkably resistant to the effects of gravity and shock, black polished bridge over the twin mainspring barrels, 6-day manual wind power reserve, and there is a second power reserve indicator on the caseback. Throw it on the wrist, and this timepiece is wonderfully comfortable, very light, easy to wear, but expressionist. Now, I have to even say, a little bit brash, bold, and extroverted. Denis Flageolet of Devotees builds remarkable machines. They probably have more money spent on R&D per employee than any watch brand in the business, and I have to say that no watch brand has more patents per person relative to the size of the staff. So this is a watch made by a guy who's both a scientist and a watchmaker in equal measure. This is state-of-the-art in independent horology. Okay. I have to say that of all the sports watches I've shown you tonight, this is by far the most, I'm going to say, exclusive, extravagant, and underrated. We've spoken of Maître du Temps, we've spoken of Lange, Devotees, we've spoken about special Panerai watches and Omega watches. We've talked about, well, just about everything that you could possibly want in a sports watch except a flying tourbillon. And 2012 at Roger Dubuis was the year of the Pulsion collection. The Pulsion collection spanned many different models, styles, and sizes, but this was the winner amongst them all. Geneva hallmark, hand skeletonized, hand finished, chronometer certified, and 100 meters water resistant. The Pulsion Flying Tourbillon is exquisite in every way. You can see the bridges have been freehand skeletonized and then engine turned, so there's perlage on their faces. Satin finish on the cap to the motion works as well as the keyless works, one large bridge over both. You can see that the cage of the Flying Tourbillon, which is visible because it has no upper bridge, but it is entirely black polished, and you can see that to good effect. Optically smooth and mirrored. Now, there is a crystal over the bezel, and you can see it's fixed in place with bolts. So this watch is robustly loomed, including the bezel. The watch is also 44 millimeters in titanium, and thus surprisingly wearable. Now, the timepiece has a wonderful ergonomic feel because of the curve of the short and tightly cropped lugs. All in titanium, this Geneva hallmark chronometer with 100-meter water resistance wears surprisingly well. Feather light with a wonderful conforming strap. You can see it also features a matching titanium deployant clasp. Look through the caseback, and you can see the skeletonized mainspring barrel. You can actually see the tightness of the coils and use that as a surrogate for a power reserve indicator. Now let's get real close to the dial. For me, this was one of the last truly appealing Roger Dubuis watches, as it's remarkably detailed, but also readable and somewhat restrained in the sense that it's not trying to be a big, stupid wank. It's big, it's not stupid. In my opinion, this was the last of the great new Roger Dubuis collections, as 2013, the year after this one, brought the Excalibur line and the departure to where we are now. This was the last bridge to the old Dubuis era, and I love it. As you can see, everything, right down to that bridge above the motion works and the keyless works, you can see there's mirrored anglage on there, a combination of silver, gold, and violet and black on that dial base, which I must add is also the main plate of the movement. That said, you ask me what my taste in sports watches tends toward, and I have to tell you, I prefer simplicity. I have my Zen EZM1 timing the show right here, and I have a timepiece that represented probably the best of 2018. Everyone knows that the #1 sports watch of 2018 didn't feature a Rolex crown on its dial. Nope. The best sports watch of 2018 was the 25th anniversary Omega Seamaster 300. Now 42mm in stainless steel, I own the predecessor, the original 2531 Bond Seamaster. You can see the Bond skeleton hands are back, and so is the Omega Wave dial after a hiatus between 2012 and 2017. Ceramic insert on the bezel with white enamel inlays, 300 meters water resistant, and the date moves down to 6 from 3 o'clock. You still have the helium escape valve, but it's now conical in profile rather than the cylinder, and you can open it underwater. On the caseback, you can see exclusive caliber 8800, 55-hour power reserve, coaxial Matas chronometer, and for the first time in a serial production 3-hand date diver 300, we have a display caseback. 50mm from lug to lug and wonderfully wearable. The watch is only 13.7mm thick. This is the pick of the litter. If you're going to buy just one sports watch off the table, yeah, I know we're charging more for the others, but if you want to set yourself up with the best package for the money, it's going to be this little beauty. An instant classic. This is one that we're going to look back from 2050, 2060, 2070, and regard with a smile, a knowing smile, because this, despite being mainstream from a big 3 brand, is a connoisseur's watch. Guys, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember, everything on the table is for sale. Links in the description with full pricing, as well as Brian Govberg's contacts, so you can get in touch if you want to make anything here your own. Have a wonderful Sunday. I hope your weekend is a blast. It continues. I shall see you on Monday, and I shall see you with the table back in action next Wednesday. Be well, have fun. Time out, Tim out. Thank you for logging on.